and a candy man. Like a freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. SCV Chat starts now.
On Saturday, April 6, 2024, an Army of Trans-Mississippi Sons of Confederate Veterans national event was held in Mansfield, Louisiana in coordination with the 125th anniversary of the Louisiana Division and the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Mansfield and Pleasant Hill, which happened the day after Mansfield. It was a great event, and I want to thank everyone who worked to make it happen. Army of Trans-Mississippi Commander J.C. Hanna and Caitlin Calhoun both played huge parts in making all of this happen, and I want to thank them for their efforts. But there were so many people behind the scenes that make make these things happen. These things just don't fall out of the sky. People work hard to make them happen, and I want to thank each and every person who worked on this to make it happen. And then I want to thank everybody who attended. Time is precious. You took time out of your busy lives and your busy schedules to come and do this. And your presence was greatly noted and greatly appreciated. And then Louisiana Division Commander Brian McClure presented me with 2 checks. One of them was responding to the challenge from the California Division. The Louisiana Division donated $3,413 for the National Confederate Museum. And then they challenged all divisions to step up and to rise up to the occasion and at least match or beat that challenge. And then Commander McClure is a member of the Sergeant James W. Nicholson Camp 1478 in Rushton, Louisiana. And his camp donated $500. And they challenged all camps in the Sons of Confederate Veterans to step up, rise up, and either meet or beat that challenge. I want to thank the Louisiana Division for their extremely generous donation, and I want to thank the members of the Sergeant James W. Nicholson Camp 1478 in Rushton for a extremely generous donation. Thank you to the Louisiana Division, and thank you to the Nicholson Camp. Now, camps and divisions, you have been challenged. Now, remember, coming up at the National Reunion in Charleston, there will be Commander-in-Chief awards that'll be given to the individual, the camp, division, and Army. So that'll be 4, an individual, a camp, a division, and an Army that has donated the most money to the National Confederate Museum. And also, the Christopher G. Meminger Award will be given to either the camp or the brigade or the division or Army making the largest monetary donation during the fiscal year to the National Confederate Museum. So the first award is going to go, there's going to be one that'll go to the individual, one to a camp, one to a division, and one to an Army. And then with the Meminger Award, it's going to be to who's given the most. I want to thank the Army of Trans-Mississippi for hosting such a great event. And again, I want to thank the Louisiana Division and Army of Trans-Mississippi and the Nicholson Camp in Rushton for this challenge that they have put out there and how they have stepped up to meet it. Everybody stay Southern out there, and may God save Dixie.
Good Monday evening, everybody, and thank you for letting us play those videos. Thank you. Whoa, you're down here, but you were just on there and in different clothes.
That's freaky.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought y'all knew I was freaky.
Well, we figured as much.
Anyway, I mean, I can't help it. You know, I'm like one of those acts that when, you know, you have to change clothes between sets, you know, that's what's going on here. I had to, you know, change real quick, you know, the whole share thing, you know.
If you believe in life after love. Hey, before we get started, as usual, the views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the SCV, its GEC, any brigades, division, camps, or other subsidiaries, strictly those of us who are expressing them. Happy second Monday in Confederate Memorial Month, everyone. Again, we appreciate y'all letting us play that video at the very beginning before the Commander-in-Chief's video there. That's why we do it. That's why this month is so important for us. We honor their legacies, because without them, there would be no Sons of Confederate Veterans. There would not be a SCV chat. So we owe a lot to those men. So good evening, gentlemen. How are y'all?
Well, I'll go ahead and speak while Moose is taking a drink. I'm doing well. Thank you all for allowing me to come on. I hope everybody saw the April as Confederate History Month proclamation. And all Southerners and all like-minded, do something Southern, do something Confederate this month. Go somewhere, visit a cemetery, do something that, you know, honors and does justice to our Confederate ancestors and to our beloved Southland. Because I still like to, you know, people to realize that to be a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, it is not a right. It is a birthright. It was earned by someone else and given to you through a bloodline. And Chuck McMichael even talked about it at the Army of Trans-Mississippi event, where he talked about us being from the land and being of the land. And he was very right about that. And I just want everybody to go out there this month and just do something Southern. And then, of course, they had the ATM event, which was this past Saturday, which I talked about in that video. I tell you, we have camps, we have brigades, and we have divisions that are stepping up. And, you know, be part of it. This is your opportunity to be part of it. And I'm encouraging everybody during this time to get out, get involved, and show your Southern pride. Be happy to be a Confederate because you have the bloodline, the blood going through you, and the bloodline of the people, the men, the women who placed themselves between an invading army and their homes and were prepared to pay the final cost. And that's why we do what we do. Now, one of the reasons that they've asked me to be on is we're going to be talking a little bit about a fella by the name of Stonewall Jackson. And I'm going to be quiet there. I'm going to let Moose chime in, let us know how he's doing. Moose?
I'm doing good, Commander. I can't complain. It's been a busy month so far, but a good month. It's an honor to be able to do as much SCV work I'm getting to do as possible. And I'll be hopefully making my way up to speaking at an SCV camp Thursday and then learn from a Marine, I think, how to shoot a gun this weekend. So all is good in the world.
And God help Carl with that. And speaking of everything that we do with the Sons of Confederate Veterans, back in beginning of March into February, we asked for you, our viewers, to submit pictures of your ancestors for an upcoming documentary that is still in production. As y'all saw at the beginning of this show, we did make a small, short little video featuring some of those pictures. Don't worry, if you didn't see your ancestor in there, he will be featured in the full feature length. But we are also implementing something new this week. Something, as long as we've got pictures of veterans, we'll be putting the pictures of the veterans up. Veteran of the Week. So, Moose, I'll put up the banner if you'll put up the picture of our Veteran of the Week, okay?
All right. Wait. Let me get into position.
I'm waiting.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, 3, 2, 1. So our Veteran of the Week this week is Brevet Captain John F. Gallagher of Company F, Ashby's 2nd Tennessee Cavalry. He is the ancestor of David Pope. David is a longtime contributor here on chat, often commenting on. He also has his show on the Douglas South Hall Freeman Group, and he's a member of our Patreon. So, David, we're honoring your ancestor this week. We'll pick another one next week, but this is our inaugural ancestor of the week. So what we'll do is when we remove his picture from the center of the screen, he'll be in the upper right-hand corner for the rest of the episode. Yeah. So, yeah. It's under logo, Moose.
I'm getting there. Be nice.
Well done.
There we go. So yeah, we're still working on the kinks on how to get that taken care of, but we figured it's a way to honor all of our ancestors as well as for you guys who are submitting those pictures. You can still submit those pictures. Just let us know. Send it in to us. So we can get that squared away. So,
Well done. I think that's a very good idea for y'all to do that. Thank y'all for that. Well done. Well done. Great idea and well done.
Yeah, as long as we got pictures, names, ranks, it's our way to perpetually remember them. And of course, eventually, I believe there's a certain general headquarters and museum and historic home up in Tennessee where they're collecting these, and those will be sent eventually once we get them all cataloged to headquarters for a aren't we doing like a pictorial database, something like that?
Well, thinking about what y'all did with that, first of all, saying the names, say their names. Every time you have an opportunity, say their name. And this is an opportunity to say their name. What I'm saying and what I'm thinking now, based off the video that y'all showed at the beginning, why can't we put that on a permanent loop playing in the museum back there where we have our wall of heroes? Why can't we put up a TV and just let this play through? And I think it's a brilliant idea, y'all doing this. So this is just continuing that.
You know, if we do it, we can't just halfway do it.
This is just something you can't halfway do.
You just can't halfway do it.
Well, you're right. You have to be fully invested and you have to go all in. If you're not going to be fully invested and all in, why go? If you're not going to show up to the dance and dance, why show up?
Oh, goodness gracious. We love you, Jason. We love you to death.
Don't worry. I catch grief off of that every time I go in.
So anyway, there's also something else that Moose has started that I'm going to let him talk about as far as the advancement of chat.
All right. So as always, I look for ways to advance us on many platforms as I can to get SCV chat out there, our message out there. And I had a couple people talk about how they love listening to us on the road and they love being able to listen to us as often as they can. So the new thing I've done, and you kind of got a sneak peek of this if you've went to our website, scvchat.com, or Patreon. We did it on Patreon first. It's always going to be on Patreon first. But we are on podcast platforms now. So if you want to watch the main Monday show, now we'll need a bit of help if we want to get Commander's comments, look around, and any other shows we add on later. We'll need a bit more help for that. It takes a bit of money to do more than one show. But our main show, SCV Chat, our flagship Monday show, will be on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts soon. We're working on it. Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music and Audible, and so many other platforms. So now you have us in a podcast version. If for some reason you just want to listen to me and Connor's voice, you can now download us and listen to us. So it's something I've been wanting to do for a while. We have the first 3 episodes of season 5 up on the podcast now. Of course, that is our SCV Chat premiere, season 5, where Commander-in-Chief Jason Boshears comes on. And, of course, our National Public Affairs Officer, Ed Phillips, comes on and gives an update. Our second episode, celebrating Lee Jackson. And our third episode, Jackson 200, the start of celebrating Jackson's 200th birthday, which we hope to be doing all year long, and we hope you join us. Continuing tonight. So we did get that all situated. You can go to scvchat.com, go over to episodes, scroll down, you'll see podcasts, and you'll see our most 5 recent episodes. Now you can go to any of the podcast platforms I said, and also find hopefully all of season 5 soon. We'll get through seasons 1 through 4 at some point, maybe.
Yeah, that's like 100 or so episodes that we would have to upload, and that takes some time to do that. So definitely
3 hours to the ones we have now. So
Yeah, so that's roughly an hour a piece. But it's a way for us to continue to share our message out. It'll be the equivalent of the audio version of what this show is. Like Moose said, it'll be on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible. Soon to be on Apple Podcast. We've got a little bit of some loops to jump through there, and pretty much anywhere else you listen to podcast, including and we're not going to try to announce it or pronunciate it, but the number one streaming for podcast in India, whatever it's called. So
if you're a fan from India, we've got you covered.
So yeah. But as Moose said, that's just for the flagship program, SCV Chat. If you want look around or Commander's comments, it cost us, I think, like $50 or something like that a month.
$50 a month to do more than one show at a time. Yes.
Right. So the way that you can help that is by joining our Patreon. Patreon campaign is live. It's patreon.com/SCV_chat. Go to the chat page. You'll see the links out there for it. It's a way for you to be able to back and support the show. We launched this 2 weeks ago, and we've already are up to a certain number of paid followers. So we appreciate that. And also, a lot of times on Patreon, like the video we'll be releasing this Wednesday about Jackson, as well as any video that we make that's not on our TikTok or not on our live stream. You'll get a first click there. There's a new community chat feature where you chat heads can talk amongst yourself. We have a personal blog. I did one about is the South having an identity crisis, or are Southerners having an identity crisis? That's posted on there, as well as other various updates about the show. So that's your first stop news, at least for SCV Chat. Don't leave right now. After the stream, go and do it. But so yeah, we're working on that. And I think that is all the rat killing before we dive into the topic.
Ooh.
So to talk about tonight, I'm going to throw up a graphic that's probably going to tick a lot of people off, because it ticked me off when I was beginning to when I saw this and we decided to do this episode. I can't remember if it was Monuments Across Dixie or the Facebook page called Confederate Veteran out there, but they posted a graphic of what looked like a medal given out at a dedication to a monument to Stonewall Jackson. And of course, our detractors were on there commenting their normal stuff. Luckily, I was using that as a way to preemptively ban them from our page. But as I was going through and reading these comments, I was getting more and more angry. So I want to throw some of the comments about what the tolerant left, what they say about Jackson as well as our Confederate ancestors. So one of them called him a pathological murder. One said, too bad he was on the wrong side of history. Another one another prominent one was he lost right. And still people claim that he was a great military leader. One person said they're not monuments, they're participation trophies for losers. Somebody referred to Jackson as a Nazi with a beard. I don't know about you guys, but I like my war heroes winners. One of them referred to Jackson as a gay icon. Another one says heroes don't take up arms against their colleagues. One guy said, yeah, he was brilliant. He did not have good sense. And this is in sarcasm, by the way. Yeah, he was brilliant. He didn't have any good sense to ride past his own sentry guard in the dark. I guess the only thing stone about him was found between his ears. One really tolerant person said, I hope his clothes are fireproof. It's hot down there. So yeah, that's just sort of the stuff that our detractors, and of course we know that's what our detractors are saying about our ancestors. But really the hate and ignorance given by those people, because it's something that they will never understand, because it's something that they don't have. a vast majority of them. They don't understand our love for our Confederate ancestors, our love for our Confederate heroes, because they don't have that flowing through their blood. Those are the type of people that we will never be able to reach, no matter how hard we try. But at the end of the day, we still have a duty and an honor, or duty of honor to our ancestors, to the men like Jackson, that's laid out in the charge. And one of the key points in there is, to your strength will be given the defense of the Confederate soldier's good name. So tonight, that's what we're going to do. We're going to sit here and we're going to defend Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. And we're going to talk more about his life instead of his military career, who the man was, what he believed, things like that. His just the like we put in the promotional image for tonight. And Moose's internet just crashed, but he'll try to get on back on. But the devout Christian soldier and the advocate for what Southerners really believed in. So, J-Bo, while Moose is off, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk just a little bit while I check the comments, okay?
Sure. When I was on last week, we had a conversation after it ended, and we were talking, and they said they were going to do a thing on defending Jackson. And we've all studied Jackson. We know that his life does not need any defense, but the way things are in the world right now, we have to defend right. We have to defend good. We have to defend God. We have to defend honor. We have to defend duty. That's what Jackson was made of. And I use both of those. Yes, he was made of that. He is no longer on this earth. But his legacy still lives on today. The things that he stood for, the things that made him him. When they were telling me about some of the things that had been said against him, the man himself, well, let's go ahead and let me phrase things this way. We have a thing that I've been heard sometime now is, who's your Mount Rushmore? Who's the guys that you would put up there? Well, Lee is one. This is mine. I'm talking about mine. Lee is one. Jackson is one. Claiborne is one. And Forrest is one. Those are my four. Those are my four Mount Rushmores. You've heard me talk about Claiborne before. Claiborne was my guy before I realized all of the rest of them. And if you've heard me give that talk, you know why. It was a very personal thing for me and my family. Living real close to where he was, 4 miles from where he was interred after the Battle of Franklin. But when you get about Jackson, you're looking at a man who is self-made. He lost both of his parents at a very young age. He is a man that was not born with a young man that was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He made himself. And I realized that having to deal with some of the people that we have to deal with now, those kind of men bring a lot of fear into people. Men such as Jackson, men such as Claiborne, because they know what is right and they will do what is right. They have their own code of honor, their own code of duty that is personal to themselves. And they will stick to that and they will adhere to that. So you talk about how he was brought up, talk about how he went to West Point, and we're not going to get into all of that. What defined the man the most was what his men thought of him. He earned that nickname Stonewall, and I don't think he was against himself being called that, but he said, it belonged to the men, because he knew the men and the men knew him, and the men fought for him. Yes, they were fighting for their hearth and home, but as we have heard so many veterans say, that when they are in the trenches and they are in there fighting, they're fighting for the man that's on the right and the man that's on their left. And these men responded to him. How he spent his last few days on this earth talks about the true character of the man. Because at a time when he was wounded, he was concerned with Lee, and he corresponded with Lee. He was concerned about the battle that was still going on, and he was devising strategies. And we heard Lee, we didn't hear him say it, but we've all read the thing about Lee where Lee said that it was Jackson's tactics that won them Chancellorsville. And so you knew that the man knew what he was doing and what he was capable of. And the way his men fought, the way they responded to him, where they earned many monikers. Yes, they were called the Stonewall Brigade, but they were also called Foot Cavalry, and how they responded to him when they needed to have these marches. And a lot of people would have a tendency to call them forced marches. Well, reading his men, what his men wrote, they were not forced marches, they were necessary marches. And these men knew they needed to do what Jackson needed done, and they responded to him, not because they were forced to, because it was their sense of duty and honor to their family, their country, and to him. And they earned these monikers. And they had all of these weird marches and these necessary marches because his men responded to him. He was in no way a dictator. He was in no way a crude and rude man. After he got grievously wounded, corresponding with Lee, talking to his men about what was going on the battlefield, and always that sense of duty to God. That's when I think of Jackson, I think of a Christian, godly man. The first time that I read something about him, and there was something he was quoted as saying, I wasn't there at the time, so I can't say that he said it, but he was quoted as saying that he was as comfortable on the battlefield as he was on his own bed, was in his own bed, because knew his life was right with God, and God would call him home when God was ready for him. And it was not within him to question God's will. He never wondered why this happened to him. Him getting wounded and the way he got wounded, that was just a casualty of battle and of friendly fire. But to Jackson, it was God's will. God said this. Now, how inspiring was that for these men? These men that tended to Jackson was as confident as Jackson reaching the pearly gates and entering into the golden streets as Jackson was. Jackson was confident in that. The men that were around him and his family that were around him, they were sure of that. There was never a conversation between him and his wife with their daughter there, infant daughter there. There was never a conversation of, do we need to make your life right? The conversation is, what is the right thing to do? Taking care of my family. That was the sense of duty that he had. I need to take care of the other generals that I'm with. I need to take care of my men that are on the battlefield, and I need to take care of my family. That is the truest sense of duty and honor. and he never questioned what happened to him. He never said why. He dealt with what was in front of him. And when he was told that he was going to die that day, it was, this is God's will. Who am I to question it? I have no right to question it. If God wishes it to be so, so mote it be. And that's how he was as a man, because he was a self-made man. He was confident in what he was doing. He was confident in what he was doing was right. He believed in exactly what he was doing. He believed that he was doing God's will up until he drew his final breath. He was doing God's will. When I think of a true Christian, I think of Thomas Jonathan Jackson. When I think of an example of how a man should be in his final times on this earth, and he knows that he will be crossing over the river and resting in the shade of of the trees, he can tend to his business while he is still on this earth. Make sure that his family is taken care of. Make sure the battles and his men are still being taken care of. He had that sense of duty all the way up until then. Our detractors, as they're called, cannot understand that. They will not understand that. They cannot comprehend the kind of environment that our ancestors, our Confederate soldiers grew up in, and how they were all self-made, how they were all self-taught, how they scratched it out of the ground and lived their life the way that they did. And they were confident. Every day they survived. They didn't have to go to Kroger and buy Doritos. They went out in the fields and they cultivated their foods, or they hunted their foods. They were self-sufficient. They were self-made. They were self-taught. And Jackson is the highest example of a godly Christian man, confident that he is going to be in the pearly gates and that he is going to meet St. Peter, and his name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And he will walk the streets of eternity. That is the kind of man that I want to be. He is the highest example. You want to know my man out front?
Yes.
Jackson. He's my man out front. Mount Rushmore is Jackson. Because if there is a life that is to be followed, it is Jackson's. It was in true service to his God, his family, and his men. And people cannot understand that. They are incapable of it. They have no idea what it takes to be that kind of person, and it scares them. What can be said about Jackson?
Yeah. No kidding. You know, and kind of piggybacking off what you were saying, whenever I give a talk about Jackson or a talk in Confederate Memorial Month, I always throw up William Shakespeare, one of my favorite quotes from him. I believe it's from Twelfth Night, but it's "Be not afraid of greatness. Some men are born great, some men achieve greatness, other men have greatness thrust upon them." And I love that quote because it epitomizes the Confederacy and the Confederate soldier. Because some men, like Robert E. Lee was born great. Other men achieved greatness, like Stonewall Jackson. Jackson achieved a greatness in life, like you were just talking about. Born in obscurity in rural West Virginia, Western Virginia, now West Virginia. You know, orphaned by the age of 7, shipped around to various relations. At one point, even runs away from his grandmother to go live with his uncle Cummins. Just so much stuff in his his antebellum, even his pre-West Point biography that's out there. But just from that to being a rising star in the Confederacy, or really a rising star at anything he put his hand to, with the exception of the teaching of physics. Not a great physics teacher, but the rest of it, doing a great job. He achieved greatness in his life, and in the blog post that I wrote about Jackson, about this, I pretty much said that, and I believe this to my heart's extent, is that Jackson is the American version of Achilles. He is the tragic hero. I mean, his life is filled with tragedies. His first wife dies with his son. His son was stillborn in childbirth. Orphaned as a young child. Him and his siblings split up at a young age, having to, as you said, claw and work his way up to getting an appointment to West Point. But even then, he was not that congressional district's first choice. He was second choice. It was because the first guy couldn't hack it within the first couple of months, left. Jackson finds out about it, goes to Washington City, speaks to the congressman saying, "Hey, he quit. Come on, give me my chance." And then goes and Bud Johnson, who was the best biographer of Jackson, I'll bring up a quote from him here in a minute, said that if you look at his transcripts, his first 2 years, he's trying to play catch up because Jackson was self-educated, because in the rural part of Virginia where he grew up in, his education was not as great as in some other areas of the South, to the point where he literally had to, when he learned how to read, make deals with some of his uncle's slaves to get pine knots to teach them how to read, which, by the way, was against Virginia's laws. And I'll talk more about Jackson's race relations here in a bit. But he claws himself up from obscurity, graduates from West Point almost at the top of his class, would have been at the top of his class had he had another year, and makes a name for himself to when by the time that he's out of the Mexican-American War, he's a breveted major. He goes from a lieutenant to a major, and then VMI, the war, and everything like that. But as you mentioned, Commander-in-Chief Boshears, Jackson was a great Christian. And let me see if I can pull up these graphics that I prepared. This first one is from the book Christ in the Camp, and I'll read it just for those that are listening on the podcast. Jackson thus acquired a wonderful influence over the African-American community of that whole region, and to this day, his memory is warmly cherished by them. When Hunter's army was marching into Lexington, the Confederate flag which floated over Jackson's grave was hauled down and concealed by some of the citizens. A lady who stole into the cemetery one morning while the Federal army was occupying the town, bearing fresh flowers with which to decorate the hero's grave, was surprised to find a miniature Confederate flag planted on the grave with a verse of a familiar hymn pinned to it. Continuing on, upon inquiry, she found that a boy who had belonged to Jackson's Sunday school class had procured the flag, gotten someone to copy a stanza of a favorite hymn which Jackson had taught him, and had gone in the night to plant the flag on the grave of his loved teacher. Excuse me, I left out something. An African-American boy who belonged to Jackson's Sunday school class. And that's one thing that really ticked me off about the quote or the accusation by that woman on the graphic that we showed earlier, saying that I hope that his clothes are fireproof because it's hot where he is. Jackson, and I'll pull up the next one. Actually, I'll go ahead and pull this up. Bud Robertson, who was the main Jackson biographer, at least my favorite biography, said, in Jackson's mind, slaves were children of God placed in subordinate situations for reasons only the Creator could explain. Helping them was a missionary effort for Jackson. Their souls had to be saved. Although Jackson could not alter the social status of slaves, He could and did display Christian decency to those whose lot it was to be in bondage. He was empathetically the black man's friend. That was again from Dr. James Robertson, who's passed. He was a professor at Virginia Tech. And that's one thing that people don't understand about Jackson, or at least our detractors ignore that when talking about him. Yeah, they talk about his service to the Confederacy, but they leave out his service to mankind, his service to humanity, especially reaching over to the African American race in that time. I mentioned in Jackson's childhood, Jackson taught his uncle's slaves how to read. That was against the law in Virginia. When Jackson was at VMI, a professor at VMI, and he founded this all-black Sunday school class, he taught the slaves how to read and write and how to be literate in that era, which again, against the law in Virginia, because he saw that as his Christian duty to do so. The fact that he treated them, and again, look at Jackson's example with Jim Lewis, whose real name was actually James Patterson Armstrong. Fun fact for you. But the amount of respect and the relationship to where Jim Lewis, who after Jackson's death remarked saying he was the most pious man or pious gentleman I ever knew. And Lewis had the ability to, or not the ability, but had the honor to lead, it was either Little Sorrel, Big Sorrel, or another one of the horses in both the Richmond and Lexington funeral procession of Jackson, speaks highly, highly, highly of the man's character. There's reports of when the monument to Jackson, I believe the one that was in Charlottesville, I cannot remember, don't quote me directly on that, or maybe it was one of them in Richmond, but it was some equestrian monument of Jackson was unveiled. It was the largest turnouts of African Americans in that community because they knew the man, they knew his legacy, and they respected him. But further on that, we talk about, and in the museum, there's a section about the Confederate revival during the war. Jackson's the one that spurred that revival. After Fredericksburg in 1862, when the Army was encamped there, or at least Jackson's Corps was, Longstreet's Corps was in the Carolinas at this time. Jackson took, I believe it was $200 of seed money out of his own personal funds and one of his horses, and gave it to Reverend Tucker Lacey, who was Jackson's personal chaplain, and had Lacey go out and get pastors of the various denominations of the Army, and would go and essentially start a chaplain's corps for the Second Corps of the Army, Northern Virginia, coming on and having sermons and things like that, religious services for the troops. And there are many accounts, because I've read some of them, of when young soldiers on a Sunday going through camp would pass where Jackson was praying, because Jackson not only attended the Presbyterian services, he attended the Methodist services, he attended the Baptist service, he attended the different services of his troops, A, to lead by moral example, and B, to pray with the men there. These young body men who would not necessarily be in the service at that time, walking by, joking, hemming, or hooting and hollering, a sentry would look at them and say, "Hey, old Jack," and that's what his men called him, "Old Jack's in there praying for you." And these guys would immediately either join the service or they would continue on their way, but with a hushed reverence. And to sum up Jackson's life, I think the best way to do it, or at least his impacts, is out of St. John's Gospel, chapter 15, verse 13. "Greater love hath no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends." That also, is I've heard it referred to as the soldier's verse. But Jackson was the Christian soldier. He was the epitome of what the South fought for and what many of the South believed at the time. And that summarizes Jackson's life to me.
I think you've summed a lot of that up very nicely and well done. Once you study the man, and you study the character of the man. I'm not talking about his battlefield strategies and everything else. We know that he was extremely competent, and we know that his men were extremely fond of him. And they responded to him not out of fear. They responded to him out of love and respect. You know, there's a lot of times there's a lot of generals out there, a lot of commanding officers that are out there, and the men that were underneath them responded to them out of fear of what might happen if they did not do what the commanding officer wanted them to do. That was not the way with Jackson's men. They responded to him the way they did and how they did because they knew the character of the man. They knew that he was respectful. They knew that he would not put them, he was, by nature of what was going on, they were going to be put in harm's way. But he was not going to be putting them in unnecessary harm. He was not going to send them at a place that he was not willing to go himself. And this is a man who just simply lived his life by his own terms and by what he knew was right. And this is a man that even in the last days, if you remember that last days, him and his wife read the book of Psalms to him. You know, while he was dying, she read him the book of Psalms.
Yeah, and that's something else that I forgot to mention. You know, Jackson dies of pneumonia in May of '63 at the absolute, and that's why I love Jackson's story as far as it's the stuff that actual legends are made out of, because Jackson is at the apex of his career when he goes out. I mean, you know, he is at the very tip top. You know, it's like kind of like Adam Southern's baseball career. He hit that one home run and then retired. I mean that's Jack, but Jackson had that string of home runs though, and he's at the very, very tip top of it there with Chancellorsville. He catches pneumonia, and at that time they did not know how to cure pneumonia. They knew that if you had pneumonia, they could predict almost to the hour of when you would die. And Jackson's wife comes in and tells him not hey, you know, you're dying. You know, she says to him, you will be with the Lord this way. Jackson's response is much a manly and Christian response, which is, that is good. I always wanted to die on a Sunday anyway. And when Hunter McGuire comes in and offers, you know, laudanum or brandy or something like that, Jackson, who is literally on death's door, who is missing an arm and some fingers off of the remaining hand, who's been dropped and bruised and everything like that, says, no, I do not want it. I want to meet the Lord with a clear mind. And then Jackson, his brother-in-law, who was a member of his staff, and Jackson's wife sit there. They sing hymns and read psalms, like you just said, all until he passes.
Very humbling. Very humbling. That's a man who has composure. That is a man that does not have self-doubt. That is a man confident of who he is, where his salvation is. There is a particular Confederate soldier that I've read his book. It's Randolph H. McKim. His book, Leaves of a Confederate Soldier. He was a second lieutenant under Jackson. This was a 18-year-old young man in 1860 when the drums of war were beginning to sound, and he was going into the ministry. And he, like so many young men at that time, felt the need to serve their country and place themselves, like I've said many times, between an invading army and their homes. And he laid down the Bible and he picked up the musket and he went and served 2 years as an infantryman under Jackson, and like I said, was his second lieutenant. Now Jackson passes before Randolph H. McKim does one of the most humbling things, and that was, you talk about in service to the man, and I'm sure Jackson was the man he was emulating and the man that he wanted to follow, because he asked at a time, he was just a 21-year-old man that had been fighting for 2 years and, you know, was a veteran. And when they needed every musket, he asked if he could lay down the musket and pick up the Bible and tend to the men for the remainder of the war. And they allowed him to do it. Now, how much of that is an influence to Jackson? Even though Jackson was not there at this time, he had already crossed over the river. But his influence and the kind of man that Jackson was influenced the decisions of all these commanding officers that let a veteran of the war lay down a musket when y'all know they needed. Y'all know what the Confederate Army was like in latter part of 63 and 64. You know they needed every able-bodied man that they needed, but even the commanding officers knew that the men needed God first. How much of that was Jackson and the influence of Jackson that was living past his death? And Randolph H. McKim spent the remainder of the war administering to the men. Every time they were on a march, he said men were coming up to him seeking salvation, and he was talking to them. Every night that they were in camp, every time they were in camp, he preached. This wasn't a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, midweek Bible study deal. This was every night. And how much of that was Jackson? And, you know, how much of that was still his influence after he was gone? They needed every able-bodied musket that they could get. And they allowed a man very capable of holding the line, filling the gap, lay down his musket and pick up his Bible and tend to the men and their religious salvation. When you come into the National Confederate Museum, there is a huge talk about the Christian revival that happened. And I can tell you right now, I've driven all across the Southland over the last 8 years, 10 years. I've driven a lot across it. And there's so many of these country churches that I see. And when I drive past them, first thing goes through my mind, a Confederate soldier come home from the war and started that church. And in many cases, that is true. And how many of those that are dotted throughout Virginia and West Virginia were Jackson's men? He saved a lot of men. He saved their souls. Is there any greater gift than to save the man beside you and to save the men that are under you? How influential was Jackson past his death? Here we are 161 years nearly past his death, and we still see the religious impact of Jackson and the Confederate soldier. And anybody who says that Jackson needed a flame retardant suit knows nothing about the man. And almost every argument that they could ever come up with is going to be immediately dispensed by anybody with just a general knowledge of the man.
You got anything?
I got something small. I don't want to interrupt this wonderful train that y'all have going, but going back to or staying on the topic of Jackson's religion, you know, he was such a devout Christian that he would not mail a letter in fear that it'd be in transit on a Sunday. He wanted to honor the Sabbath. And even though, of course, great general, great soldier, he fought in many battles, he always made sure his men had one day of rest for worship. And one of my favorite stories that I talked about in our Jackson 200th episode, check that out, was that General Jackson, while he was on his deathbed, sent his personal pastor, his priest, the chaplain, to go do an Army of Northern Virginia service where Lee was, because he said something on the lines, I'm paraphrasing, you know, that, you know, I know where I'm going. Go take care of the men now. I'll be okay. and that was he did that. He sent him away the day before he died, so he could be there for that Sunday service. And something I didn't find out till recently, but there are I think 5 African American churches that trace their roots back to Jackson's Sunday school classes as well. Again, that's something I didn't learn until this weekend.
Yeah, and that to me in and of itself speaks highly of the man. The fact that there are still and talking about the lasting legacies of Jackson is that still to this day, 161 years later, because of what he did before the war, and honestly, if he never had the military career after the war, would still be, and I'm sure is his proudest accomplishment, is that 161 years later, an effort that he started to share the gospel is still being an impact, for these countless of generations later. I mean, that is the, I mean, just from knowing the man, from reading about him, I think that would be his most proudest achievement.
I did not know the man. I've only read about him. And he's not the kind of man that you need to put words in his mouth. He was very capable of speaking for himself. My judgment of him, if there's such a thing as judgment, but a judgment of his character, he looked at every human being as a child of God and a soul that needed saving. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered. Not the color, not anything. All that mattered was there's another one of God's creatures, just like I am. And I know I need salvation, and they need salvation. Let's get busy saving souls. And I don't know if he ever said those words, let's get busy saving souls. He didn't have to say it. He lived it.
Amen.
And that is the ultimate example of a man, a God-fearing Christian man. He wasn't fearful of God. He was fearful of doing the wrong thing that would make him look bad in God's eyes. That is when somebody says that they're fearful. They're not fearful of God, because if they live their life right, they know that they are in the presence of a worshipful, forgiving God. But Jackson, when you say the words that he was as comfortable in his bed as he was on the battlefield, that last day, that was actions. That wasn't words. Most times when some people say that, it's called hyperbole. They're saying it and they really don't mean it. They're being in jest. But Jackson was a man that lived it. There was a lot of things he didn't have to say because he lived the example. And that is the legacy of Jackson.
What's the name of one of your aide-de-camps?
Thomas Jonathan Stonewall, and I'll let you finish the last name if you want to.
Jackson McCaskill.
Yes.
Had to mention Jackson there.
Yes.
He's a good kid.
And he really is.
Second best aide de camp.
Anyway,
did you ask if he's the best aide de camp?
Second, he's your second best aide de camp.
I wonder who the first one is.
it's definitely not the one that turned down the job.
Boy,
right,
he did. He sure did.
Yeah.
But
by accident. All right, back to Jackson.
had y'all ever heard of that deal about who's your Mount Rushmore?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and until I started studying Jackson, and I realized the character he was, I'm gonna say my guy that was out front during, and I'm talking about the Confederate time. I'm not talking about the founding fathers. But if I were to take from the founding fathers up until now, you know, you have to put in Washington, you have to put in Jefferson, and I've still got to put in Jackson.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just that man that covered all times. And he has, okay, we know why the detractors are out there. And some of the things that they say, at some point in time, you just have to automatically dismiss them because they're a pest dispenser. That's all they are. They're just parroting and just spitting out stuff that everybody else has said. They don't know the character of the man. They probably had to Wikipedia him to find out about him. And you know what you get when you look at Wikipedia, but we're not going to get into Wikipedia, okay? We're not getting into that. But when you start studying Jackson and you pick up the books of the men that served under him, wouldn't we all want to be remembered the way Jackson's men remembered him? And those men, the souls that he saved, the churches he started, Jackson's influence is still saving souls to this very day. I know of nothing other way to put it. He has saved souls because of his influence. When they start talking about the religious character of some men, I know that there were people out there that were absolute heathens, okay? Jackson wasn't one of them. He wasn't a heathen. This was a man of God. This was a man that treated everybody with love and respect. And he looked at each person as one of God's children. And you talked earlier about it being a crime, illegal, to teach slaves to read. He was the kind of man that if there was a human law written that defied God's law, he went with God's law, because God's law is the law. The law of man is a law made up by man, but the law of God is the final word. And if there were a law that was in contradiction, he went with God's. And he knew that these men, these human beings, these God creatures, needed to be able to learn to read the Bible. And he wanted them to learn and study. That's Jackson. So to say the things they did about him, I know that we want to sit there and we want to respond to them, but some of the comments are beyond responding because they are ill-formed, crude, and I don't think that they would have served right in Jackson's army. That's all I can say.
And to get off on what those people were talking about, you know, and kind of what I mentioned earlier, but I'll mention it again. And I wrote about it in our blog post on Patreon. You know, I'm gonna be frank here. Actually, no, I'm not gonna be frank. I'm gonna keep my shirt on. Thank you. I was waiting on that punchline. But at first, when I read it and I read comments like that, yeah, it pisses me off. But that eventually that anger begins to get morphed into, you know, it fires me up for dedication to the SCV. But eventually, while I keep that fire lit in me for the SCV, I pity those people. Those people who do not have a heritage that they can be proud of like we do, that do not have heroes that we can be proud of like Stonewall Jackson, who do not have the what we share in the SCV and the UDC and everything like that, who don't have or understand the love that we have for men that we never even knew. And I also pity them because they'll never experience the camaraderie that we're having right now. you know, and that's sad, and that their lives are so meaningless that they have to, again, my views and opinions, that their lives are so meaningless that they have to go and hunt down a post about a great man and then spew their hate and ignorance about somebody who they never knew and never would understand in a month of Sundays because they don't want to understand him. It goes against what they've been taught and what they've been force fed by the education system, and it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic what their lives are, and I pity them.
I pity him too, because history and God has blessed us with some great men that he has influenced. And he has given us these people to learn about him from, like Jackson, a great Christian man, and to just learn how to be a good leader. And they're wiping out a whole section of the history. Now they're trying to wipe out all history. From the beginning of America to now does not matter to them. And I pity them because they can learn so much from these men. They can become better people. I know every time we talk about Jackson, you know, not only do I feel a fire to the cause, to my heritage, to defend my history of my ancestors, no matter the cost, I feel more of a love to go home and spend as much time with my Heavenly Father as I can, to try to get a better relationship. I honestly do pity them, because I wish they could get that from a moment like this. I wish they could look up and be like, that's someone I can model myself after and become a better man and a better Christian. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you do on this earth, as long as you know God.
And that sums up Jackson's life.
Yeah. He was really, Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson was really as comfortable in his bed as he was on the battlefield, because he knew that his soul was right. He knew where he was going. He knew what he was doing was the right thing. And do I feel sorry for him? The people that spew this venom and hate that we're talking about, do I feel sorry for them? Yes. Their lives they're living a very diminished life. They're not living a full life. Jackson would have tried to save their souls.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of man that he was. And that's what they don't understand about him. That's what a lot of people don't understand about the people from this time to begin with. All of these people, both men and women, were descendants of survivors. They knew how to cut it out from nothing, and they knew how to make it happen, and they knew what was important in life. What kind of love and respect are people who spew such venom capable of? Is there ever a quote that somebody has said that Jackson himself said, to where he ever talked bad about somebody else? I have not read one. He never he might be criticizing somebody bad or how they did this or that, but as far as being critical and to slander, for lack of a better term, and there are better terms out there, but in my mind right now, he never slandered another individual, because he knew God didn't like that. He knew God wanted us to lift up each other. And
Right.
when you have that much hate and that much venom, how can you love and respect another human being?
The only thing that I could think of, and even then, it was done in a professional setting, was the dispute he had with Richard Garnett prior to his death, Jackson's death. But again, that was in a professional setting. But it wasn't like, it was because Garnett wasn't following his orders to the extent that Jackson expected. It wasn't, like he was saying, oh, well, your feet stink, your mother is of ill repute, and you ain't a good general. I mean, it wasn't anything personal. It was strictly professional. That's about it.
He never slandered the character of another individual.
Right.
They might not have liked what they did on the battlefield, and like you said, but wasn't that his job as the general?
Yeah.
Wasn't he doing his job? I know how the battle's supposed to go. I know the overall plan, the big plan, and I needed you following it, and you didn't follow it. But that was the extent of it. He never called the man a name. He never, as far as I'm aware, now somebody could come up with something and show me, and I'd have to go back and do my own research on it. But I just don't believe that Jackson was the character of a man, especially as he became an older individual and he went through the trials of life that he did, losing a wife and child in childbirth, fighting in Mexico and how he fought there, and the many experiences that he went through. With that kind of life experience, it changes you. And it changed him. I'm not saying he didn't say something or do something bad when he was 12 years old, okay? But he did not do that once he realized who he was and what was important to him, and he lived his life according to God's will. And I just think that the way he handled himself when death was coming, that's a man. Where he is making sure his business is taken care of. His daughter is taken care of. His wife is taken care of. All of the things of where he's going to be buried, they're taken care of. And then he worships God.
I don't know if we can get any better than this, guys.
Yeah. To answer Randy Rhodes, it's because we were invaded. And there's a quote from Jackson. Randy said, with the strength in his beliefs in gods, it's almost impossible to understand how these men could go into combat and kill Union soldiers. I understand the need to protect the southern states and people, but to kill and then go to prayer is hard to imagine. The Bible even says it, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We are human, we are flawed. There's only one man that walked this earth that was perfect and did anything perfect. Jackson even said, when, what will we do? We've been invaded. What will we do? Jackson's response was, kill them all.
Yes.
And Jackson believed that his army was the army of the living God, that it was fighting for a just cause, that they were doing God's will on earth, and if it was God's will, he would be with the army and bring them final victory, and if not, it would not happen. That's how it happened, was the fact that, Jeff Davis said it best. All we ask is to be left alone. And had we been left alone, had the states been allowed to determine their own destiny, just like it was in 1776, it wouldn't have happened. Had we just been left alone, and Sumter would have never happened, the war wouldn't have happened. There we are. There's a reason why it's called the War of Northern Aggression. Anyway, I think we've wrapped. Go ahead.
I want to say this in response to that. Randolph H. McKim, who I mentioned earlier, was a second lieutenant under Jackson, laid down the musket, picked up the Bible, tended to the men for the last 2 years of the war, the remainder of the war. He had this to say in a speech that he gave 48 years after the war. As for myself, I can only repeat what I have said elsewhere on a previous occasion. If ever men were heroes, these were the men. What hardships did they not uncomplainingly endure on the march and in the bivouac and in the trenches? And if it can be said of men, dulce et decorum post martyria amore, which is Latin for it is sweet and fitting to die for one's land. If it can be said of men, it is sweet and fitting to die for one's land. These were the men. Rusted and ragged were their uniforms, but bright and shiny were their muskets and their bayonets, and they moved like the very whirlwind of war. They knew little of constitutional interpretation, but what they did know were armed legions were marching up on their homes, and it was their duty to push them back at all cost. And this was a man who served under Jackson, was a man of God, preached after the war. Tell me that's not Jackson's influence. Because part of that, in that speech, was who can forget Jackson's men and their weird marches in the Valley Campaign? You know, people like to say, how could they do that? How would you be if they invaded you? Jackson is also quoted as saying, before the war started, if war comes, let's pull the sword and throw away the scabbard. Because he knew God's will. And he knew the difference between right and wrong. And he knew that all men should strive to live the life that God has given them to live. Plain and simple.
Jason, I think you'll find this interesting. It's something that I forgot about until just a moment ago. You were talking about the different, and it's a comment that we've starred from Carl. Let me find it. Boom. We have Southern Christians today who are Christians because of Jackson's influence, and they've never heard his name. It's similar to James Webb reminding us that your worldview is formed about 250 years before you're born. It becomes a part of our culture. So with it being Confederate Heritage Month, and I often talk about my ancestor, Captain Nathan W. Slay, who this time 162 years ago was laying in a field hospital outside of Shiloh, Tennessee, with a bullet in his face. He had 7 brothers that all served in the Confederate Army. One of them was Corporal Cordon Slay, who was a member of the 16th Mississippi Infantry, Company C. He was a musician. The 16th was the only Mississippi regiment in Jackson's foot cavalry in the Valley Campaign of 1862. He was a member of the Hazelhurst Brass Band, and according to the after the war, and according to the family Bible, he helped found one of the churches that's still there to this day in Copiah County, Mississippi. So yeah, and so did his brother Alonzo, another one.
Yeah. Jackson's life and the way he lived his life doesn't need defending, but it has to be defended in the modern society that we are in. Just remember this one simple thing. How much time do you have to go after or contradict people who do not care, who do not know, who are spouting the devil's venom? Because you have to remember who the ultimate liar is. That is Satan himself. You can spend your time defending Jackson to heathens who will never understand the Southern way of life, the Southern soldier, and our Southern ways, or the Southland. Or you can get busy doing what you know is the right thing to do, as given to us by the examples of Lee and Jackson. You know where the fight needs to be made, but do we want to fight against heathens that are spewing the devil's venom? Or do we want to get busy doing what we should be doing by defending and honoring? What we're doing tonight is defending and honoring. That is the purpose of SCV Chat. When we talked about this so many years ago in Jacksonville, Florida, this is one of the things that we said that we were going to do, because this is living the charge. Anybody who listens to this will get to know the true character of the man, because we have given book, chapter, and verse.
Literally. So, well,
Mike.
we appreciate everybody. Well, go ahead, Moose.
Mic drop, but also going to plug the rest of the shows for this week. Do you have anything you want to add real quick, though, first?
Oh, well, that's where I was going to head us to. So you go ahead and hit us there.
All right. Make sure to share this episode out. Let's get a big, big presence on social media for General Jackson. This is an episode that's been needing to happen for a while. And just those poor souls that are very uneducated finally pushed us all to do it. So let's get this a big episode out there. And make sure you tune in to Commander's Comments this Thursday at 7 p.m. Confederate Standard Time, as we have our Chief of Heritage Operations, Mr. Ron Kennedy, and our Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief, Walter D. Donnie Kennedy, on to give you an update about what our national SCV is doing. You have something to say, Commander?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately and fortunately, I will not be able to be on. I was, Commander's Comments is generally the first Thursday. But when Mr. Roy Hudson needed to come on because of some scheduling, and I completely understand that. However, Thursday night, I'm going to be speaking in South Carolina. And this coming weekend, I'll be at the South Carolina Division Reunion. That's the reason why I'm not going to be on Commander's Comments. One of the things that I will be talking to the Kennedy twins about is, if you will look at our awards manual, we have awards that have to be in April 15th. So there will be they'll be able to look on the awards manual and be able to see all of that. But that is one of the things I'm going to be asking them to remind everybody, because we are starting to prepare awards for our national reunion that is in Charleston. And I apologize to everybody for not being able to be on. It's just the way the mop flops, as an old boss I used to work for say. I'm not able to be there on Thursday night, but I am sure the Kennedy twins are very capable.
Well, I can't wait for it. Thank you, Commander. We definitely understand scheduling conflicts happens, especially when you do a show year-round long like we do. Also, make sure to tune in this Tuesday for Look Around Florida, hosted by the Florida man himself, Sean McFall. Again, live at 7 p.m. Confederate Standard Time. And any other of our sister shows, what we call them?
Yeah, whatever's in the family. If y'all
name.
didn't see Michael Hardy's episode last night with Josh Blankenship, that was a really good episode. We shared the live stream here on our page. Go back and give that a watch. That was really, really good episode that they did. David, comment if y'all are doing something Friday on the Douglas Southall Freeman. Also, everything that's going on with monuments across Dixie. Hey, if you are new to the channel, make sure that you are liking, whether it's YouTube channel or Facebook page, like and follow and subscribe and all that good stuff. If this is your first time hearing about the SCV and you're interested in joining or getting help with your genealogical research, go to scv.org. That is scv.org. We have camps or divisions in most states, all the way, including Europe, as well as our headquarters camp. If you're so interested, we also, if you do not have the genealogical backing, or it's getting a little tough to prove your genealogical requirements, or if you're a female and you want to help us out, join the Friends of the SCV today. You get a wonderful membership certificate, a lapel pin, a 1-year subscription to the Confederate Veteran Magazine. Again, it is open to men and women. It's $45 a year, I believe. Subsequent donations of $35 a year to continue your veteran subscription is required. Very, very, very good organization if you want to help us out. Again, friends are not members of the SCV and may not exercise any membership rights, including claiming to be members, but it's a way to support the cause if you cannot join with us. Also, if you are enjoying things that we are doing as far as supporting our truth, the true history of the South, make sure that you are helping the museum. Friends of the Museum is a great way to do that. Email Adam Southern for more information. We'll have a new email address soon that's strictly dedicated to that. We just haven't had a chance to set it up yet. Memberships are tax deductible. You get a e-newsletter. There are various membership levels that run from $25 to $1,000. All proceeds go to the museum. Also, we have the Friends of Elm Springs. Again, all memberships are tax deductible. The memberships run at the same levels. Proceeds go to the restoration of the beautiful home of Elm Springs in Columbia, Tennessee. You do not have to be a member of the SCV to join any of those groups. This week, as it is mentioned, we have Commander's Comments. So if you submit any news for Look Around the Confederation, we will not be able to cover it on the air, but what we will do is an individual post for your things to get out what your camps are doing with across the Confederation, kind of like what you've seen this past couple of weeks here on our Facebook page. If you do have any news, please make sure to email those pictures and write-ups to scvyouthOutreach@gmail.com to be featured either on our post or on our show. If it's something that needs to be on the show, especially if it's a video or something like that, make sure to have it submitted before 3 p.m. Confederate Daylight Time to ensure it can get on the episode. Again, if you're liking what we're doing here, consider supporting us on Patreon. It's a way to keep us on the air. We'll have some information, any late breaking news that we put up, as far as previews, as well as behind the scenes tours of what Moose and I do before the episode or after the episode, goofy things like that. It'll help us. Plus, you're helping the National Museum out, as a portion of those proceeds will be going to the museum. And once the museum is paid off, it'll be going to the forest rides again. So that'll help. Any little bit helps. Next week on Monday, Moose and I will be talking about our Confederate heritage and why it is important to us. I am a millennial, late millennial, born in the early 90s. Moose is a Gen Z or Zoomer.
Get to be called Zoomer.
Yep.
No.
He is. So he's younger than I am. So it's a perspective from young people why it is important to honor our history and our heritage, something that maybe you can use as talking points for young people in your area to try to get them to join your camp. So that'll be next Monday, 7 o'clock, Confederate Standard Time. One last thing we want to leave you before we roll our end credits. Again, thank you, Commander-in-Chief Jason Boshears, for coming on.
Thank you for allowing me to come on. I do thank you for that. Thank you for allowing me to come on and speak about one of the men that is on my Confederate Mount Rushmore.
And to remind everybody about another one, as Patrick Claiborne once says, surrender means that the history of this heroic struggle will be written by the enemy, that our youth will be trained by Northern school teachers, will learn from Northern school books, their version of the war, will be impressed by all the influences of history and education to regard our gallant dead as traitors and our maimed veterans as fit subject for diversion. He said that in 1864, I believe, right before his death. And those prophetic words are coming true more and more each day. So it's time for you to stand up and do something for your heritage, especially now in April. We'll be back Thursday for Commander's Comments. We appreciate y'all for viewing. And in the words of our friend, the late and great Harold Philpotts, no Fumar in the elevator.
Stay Southern, everybody. May God save Dixie.
Rudder for up.